Dear colleagues, thank you for registering and joining us at this workshop for PRR practitioners and diplomats. The workshop aims to share good and promising practices of rehabilitation and reintegration of female returnees in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan. We had a first workshop on children returnees on 5th of August, and it's our second workshop. So then we are going to conduct interviews with local practitioners to develop compendium of good practices of rehabilitation and reintegration of women and children, which will be published in November of this year. So as you know, women represent a particularly complex group, as they can be victims, perpetrators, recruiters, or just cookers and caregivers. So women had different motivations in traveling to the Middle East and joining terrorist group there. So some of them blindly followed their husbands without thinking about consequences. Some women traveled to the Middle East with So women under ISIS were subject to sexual and gender-based and other forms of violence, which can produce an additional layer of trauma and stigma. So women returnees are particularly complex group, and they need individually tailored rehabilitation approaches. So today we will discuss all peculiarities and good practices and challenges of rehabilitation and reintegration of female returnees from Tajikistan and Kazakhstan, and also we will have observations of so the workshop has been organized by the Bulan Institute for Peace Innovations. The Bulan Institute is a research institute based in Geneva, Switzerland, with a regional office in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. Our mission is to promote peace, security, and human rights in Central Asia, Eurasia, and South Asia. So we have 4 speakers today. And 4 of them, they will reflect on Kazakhstan and Tajikistan and also European experience. So we will listen first to our experts, and then we will have Q&A session. And we will start our workshop with Kazakhstan. So as you know, Kazakhstan is the only country in the world which carried out a big-scale repatriation operation, bringing back more than 700 people, including 37 men and 188 women. I would like to ask participants, please mute your microphone, so there are noise coming. And we have many people in the waiting room. Let me admit them first. So, mute. And we will have 2 speakers from Kazakhstan today. And one of them, Gulnaz Razdykova. She's a director of local NGO and psychologist, and Alim Shaumetov, former director and senior advisor of NGO Actiet. Could you please mute your microphone, please, dear participants, because there is so much noise coming. Thank you very much. So we will continue. So we will start from Gulnaz Razdykova. And as you know, rehabilitation programs must include multi-stakeholders, including especially civil society organizations, because they have trust of people, access to communities, and they have real practical experience. So Kazakhstan involved civil society organizations, and one of them is Center for Analysis and Development of Interconfessional Relations in Kazakhstan, based in Pavlodar. So Gulnaz Razdykova is a PVA specialist and psychologist with extensive experience in working with post-conflict trauma, and she has been actively involved in the rehabilitation and reintegration of women and children repatriated from Syria and Iraq. She launched the Zoom Jusan project to work online with female returnees during the pandemic. And currently, she is a director of the Center for Analysis and Development of Interconfessional Relations in Kazakhstan. Ms. Razdykova, thank you for joining us. And you are one of the practitioners who met the very first group of returnees in 2019. And since then, you have been working intensively with female returnees, including children also. Could you please share with us Kazakhstan's experience and promising practices in rehabilitation and reintegration of women? You have 15 minutes and floor is yours. Thank you.
Большое спасибо, Чолпан, большое спасибо вашему институту.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your institute. I wish prosperity on all the best to your institute. And thank you for gathering same thinkers. Looking at the list of participants, I can recognize most of them. These are the participants who are not impartial to this topic. Please, Chalpon, stop me if I fail to fit the 15 minutes presentation. Zhusan operation in 2019 took place in Kazakhstan. By that, we repatriated 595 citizens, 408 children, men and female.
Привлечены к уголовной ответственности. Всего операция «Жусан» продлилась 6 месяцев, это с 5 января по 26 июня 2019 года. Также
The operation took place in 2019 within 5 months, so most of repatriated became subject to criminal liability. And by that, later during the other operation, we evacuated 14 children.
Пожалуйста, можно чуть-чуть помедленнее, потому что переводчик не успевает, пожалуйста. Спасибо.
Окей. Ну, те, кто вот мои коллеги из Центральной Азии, когда мы говорим...
So 14 children were repatriated or returned from Iraq. Zhusan is a Kazakh word or terminology. Let me share some lickbest. Zhusan is a plant that grows in Kazakhstan steppes. Zhusan is associated with the smell of motherland for each Kazakh citizen. Therefore, we have selected the name for the operation, Zhusan. As I said earlier, all male were brought into criminal liability because according to the criminal law, criminal liability is from 14 years. And 17 years is in full capacity be liable for criminal liability. For women, maximum imprisonment totaled 8 years. It is noteworthy that most women were sentenced conditionally, not to separate them from children. And therefore, the mission, Zhusan, is a humanitarian mission and met the legislation and international standards. In Constitution of Kazakhstan states that if a person is engaged into terrorism, he can be withdrawn from his citizenship. But not a single citizen was applied this norm, particularly those who were repatriated from Syria. After arrival, all returnees were accommodated at special rehabilitation camp close to Caspian Sea. All women stayed 30 days. After these 30 days, they returned to their permanent place of residence. During these 30 days, we worked in 4 main areas: medical screening, psychological screening, theological work, and social work. We mobilized, worked with them, mobilized the best professionals from entire Kazakhstan. First of all, women and children were provided medical care. Some were also provided surgeries, invasive injuries after blasting, and so on, so-called emergency care. Some women were provided clothing, personal hygiene, toys, and so on. At the camp, we performed genome expertise examination to establish relationship, relatives, and based on DNA analysis, all children were issued documents and certificates of birth, and each child received a birth certificate with a place of residence, Kazakhstan. Primary psychological care was also provided to children, including ideological work. At the adaptation camp, we have developed individual, theological, psychological, and social rehabilitation plans. Social workers focused on communication and socialization skills, family relations, and so on. Theologians assessed the confessional beliefs and theological level and literacy. Psychologists worked on PTSR syndromes, anxiety, and fear. The work was organized on 2 levels, on individual and group levels. In parallel, we have developed media strategies. Despite difficulties faced by both women returnees and ourselves as professionals and practitioners, and given that this was the preliminary work and for the first experience, we hide nothing from journalists. We had journalists, international researchers, and other experts. Mass media was very active in public domain because we promoted that woman against ISIS ideology. As of today, we have 800 interviews and films based on faith of these women. All materials are open publicly. What methods do we use, particularly the methods used by psychologists? First, maternity care or therapy, care, understanding, active listening. It is very beneficial when we work with customers, particularly the customers with PTSR, is the therapy, art therapy, and guest therapy. In addition, we worked and provided trainings to lift anxiety, fear, inadequacy. We also applied other techniques, psychological techniques, cultural events, leisure and rest, personal skills and capacity building, media practices, training, education, and with follow-up employment. So what were the conditions of those returnees? So the first diagnosis during the adaptation period, depersonalization, blocking emotional links, absentees, trauma, and ability to recall main aspects of trauma, lack of trust to future or belief to future, and the syndrome of the guilt of those who survived, which is typical for children who lost their children. Very strong emotional links with husbands died. Most women were observed coping strategy when no one can understand them. They used to say, you will never understand us, no one can understand my problems, and none of you saw what we saw. So these are the main challenges they faced, and we diagnosed at the first contact. Methods of work were organized on the following. We had both open and closed groups. Open groups were focused on education and to structure the trauma perception. In other words, we work with their recalls at the trauma momentum. Closed groups focused on women with DCPP. Despite all positive outcomes and results, we're very clear that there are risks of secondary trauma and secondary radicalization. And these risks are linked with family and close family members. Another risk is the marriage with radicalists, lack of trust from the society, or when people were criticizing against this woman. Availability of disabilities, physical disabilities, trauma and amnesia, inability to work, lack of efficiency in rehabilitation measures, And much depends on individual and psychological aspects or capacity of a woman. Some women up to date, they maintain emotional links with women who are in Syrian camps, who they build warm trust relations. Trauma membrana is the lack of links or absence of links with the motherland. And the last point is a self-stigmatization momentum or aspect. When women stigmatize themselves, that also leads to secondary radicalization. Despite the experience, trauma and negative experience can be a starting point or growing point. Why? Because some women, they're more positive in adaptation and they feel experience as a motivation. They can become outreach workers, volunteers, or trainers. During the pandemic, it became a challenge for all of us. The challenge was linked to offline. The link was due to the lockdown, and there were concerns that we cannot continue our work offline. For that, I have organized online trainings with 100 women, Zujusan project, and online, virtually. We succeeded in bringing many international and national experts. It helped us not to only continue our programs and projects, but also to create volunteer groups from returnees. Some repatriants or returnees are the members of our councils. In particular, we had a larger workshop in April this year in Almaty. Robert Orel, by the way, personally attended this workshop and met women, and he witnessed this volunteer movement among returnees. Next point I would like to draw your attention are as follows. To promote patronage psychology, most women were trained and retrained with follow-up employment. Most of them work in service sector, small business. Some even have business projects. They obtain grants, and we have very successful cases when women themselves are employers for many citizens of Kazakhstan. Not to seed social inequality, this woman will never provide some special social benefits. They receive or eligible for social benefits and securities similar as other Kazakh citizens, unless they have many children, single woman, or single parent family. So they obtain social security similar as other citizens of Kazakhstan. Another positive example is the sponsorship from Muslim community of Kazakhstan. Some women and mothers who have many children, were procured and bought apartments through sponsorship or who are in difficult life situation. Some women were provided pro bono residence as shelter. These are the main aspects I would like to share with you. This work has yet to be completed, despite we performed huge work. Primary challenges are addressed up to date. However, risks and challenges are in place. Thank you. I hope I fit in 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Gulnaz. Thank you. Oh, I hope I'm not muted. Okay. So thank you very much, Gulnaz. It was very interesting and important presentation, and thank you for your tireless work in Kazakhstan, for your contribution and professionalism in this issue. I think Kazakhstan's experience is very rich and unique, and it's also because of its strong ideological pillar dozens of theologians and religious leaders have been working with returnees to explain them what is true Islam, and they call this de-radicalization process. So we have today with us Mr. Alim Shaumetov, and Alim Shaumetov is a former director and current advisor at the foundation called Information, Propaganda and Rehabilitation Center Akhniet in Kazakhstan. He worked for the State Agency of Religious Affairs of Kazakhstan and for the Council for Relations with Religious Organizations under the Kazakh government. Mr. Shaumetov is an author of 30 academic articles and 10 manuals on issues of prevention of religious extremism. Mr. Shaumetov also while working in Akhniet, led the de-radicalization program for returnees and was responsible for the ideological part of the process. So, Mr. Shaumetov, thank you for joining us. And could you please tell us about your work? How did you have been working with returnees to de-radicalize them? And what does it mean? How theologians are working with women, and what are the outcomes of such intervention? Thank you.
Добрый вечер, уважаемые коллеги, уважаемые участники семинара.
Very good evening, dear colleagues and participants. Cholpon, thank you very much for the invitation.
Предоставили слово, возможность такое выступить, поделиться опытом. Да, действительно, вот.
Thank you for giving the floor. Since 2019, from the Jusan operation period, Gulnaz has shared most of the work we performed and achieved in Kazakhstan.
Она была поручена именно центру ХНЕТ, и непосредственно наши специалисты, это теологи и психологи.
Our specialists are theologians and psychologists who have been working and continue working in this area. It is not a secret that up to date, we don't have universal or unique recipes to rehabilitate people suffered from ideology or radicalist ideology. We learned based on our own experience. We were analyzing each interview and each meeting with returnees. We made our own conclusions and findings, and those knowledge we used in our work. We don't talk only about ex-combatants, but also we mean all those suffered from this ideology. It is noteworthy on how we built our work on rehabilitation of our citizens. First of all, 2014, myself with my two colleagues, at that time we were only 3 at our center. At that time, if you remember, there were a lot of people willing to travel to Iraq and Syria, young men. And in order to prevent them traveling, those who were willing to be part of jihad, we were appealed by their relatives, husband, wife or relatives, who asked us to help them to stop traveling. And we were ready to work with them to sensitize and raise awareness of these young men, so they make up their mind and not to travel, travel and live inside caliphate. For that, we have developed the de-radicalization algorithm. Based on this algorithm, we continue working using that method. First of all, we had to develop our own methodology. Why? Because in each organization, each specialist must use the unique terminology and words. The sound is not stable. We have developed our methodology, explained to our specialists and experts to have a unique terminology and concept. As the next step, we have developed qualification requirements for our specialists to be hired for both theologians and psychologists. Standard requirements included education, skills, basic knowledge of Arabic language, Arabism, and work experience in de-radicalization. So their experience, our experts' experience, was the focus. It was not enough if a person knew hadith or surah from Quran. For us, it was important that this expert, a potential candidate, had to have deeper knowledge in religion, followers of radicalist movements. It was quite a positive experience. And by that, we gained certain experience. The first step on de-radicalization, we have divided into several stages. Unfortunately, his connection is very poor.
Когда вот эти молодые люди, естественно, обвиняют всех в окружении, то есть в неверии, тех, которые не принимают их идеологию.
We know that those radicalists, they never accept or never accepted any other ideology or the movements or flows in Islam. In addition, those young men and women, they become suffered from a bara method.
Эти сторонники вот эти, дистанцируются от окружающих, то есть от тех лиц, да, которые не принимают их идеологию, не принявших их идеологию, то есть от них дистанцируются.
So-called renunciation of an ideology, when they never accept any other movements or ideologies. And based on our algorithm on de-radicalization, our focus was the establishment of so-called itaha, or trust gaining. If we gain trust, as soon as specialist theologians establish such trust, we can have positive result. This is a very difficult process. Why? Because those returnees from Syria and Iraq spent 6-7 years Takfirist ideology. It was difficult to gain trust, to establish trust. Our specialists therefore had to work with the focus on this methodology. Main requirement for our staff is the result-oriented, continuous work and renunciation and prevent the spread of this ideology and to commit unlawful actions. So the main stage was the trust building. Based on this algorithm, up to date, as I said earlier, we pay a lot of attention. This algorithm is available, it's nothing secret there. However, we considered our local traditions and customs, and we applied it against returnees and destructive religious flows. So the main key is the trust building and trust gaining. Next stage is to deliver the actions or activities on de-radicalization. On that stage, we establish contact with the customer. If we have law enforcement, of course, officer, it's really difficult to build trust. However, we have to use our interpersonal skills to build trust, in particular with ex-convicts and prisoners. After establishing the interpersonal contacts, we shift to trust building again, and then we implement a cycle of activities, particularly the impact on actions or the thoughts that led him to radicalization. The specialist analyzes the work on a continuous basis, identifies a new information, and upon receiving new information from our customer, our specialist had to plan further actions. This cycle continues repeatedly before we reach the impact or effect of de-radicalization of a customer. Of course, the question is how we can see or assess if we do de-radicalize the person or not. For that, we have a scale developed at our center. So the following criteria were in place in the scale: changes in his religious views, manner of communications, socialization, social status of a person, changes in attitudes, changes in attitudes to the government or the politics, refusal from ideology, changes and attitudes to Islam, spiritual administration, and traditional Islam in Kazakhstan. External appearance, it is also important. There are a lot of disputes, of course, among experts. They can change or cheat us by changing their clothing. They can wear modern clothing, but at the same time, some believe that they still maintain their radicalist ideology. But I'm confident that after the scale and a list of accomplishments, we can assess the person if he changed his views or not, before and after. What changes were in place, for instance, during the first meeting or after a certain time and work? We can establish, of course, you can establish changes. Of course, it requires time. 5-6 months is more than sufficient for one person. With others, we work for more than 1 or 2 years. It's an international standard as practice, of course, not only typical for Kazakhstan. Much depends on his individual capacity, education, and bringing up. Talking about women returned within the Jusan operation, some were very easy to work. 5-6 months were more than enough. After their arrival to Kazakhstan, they started understanding and realizing that the ideology of Takfiri jihadism was very dangerous. Takfir jihadist ideology was rejected, and they understood that they're forced to travel to Syria. And they start realizing that this was the ideology of Takfirism who made them to travel. Certainly our specialists, we share the values of traditional Islam, of our
нашими предками принятого масхаба, то есть, естественно, они первый раз узнают.
Sharing the mazhab or the scholar in Islam, which had been practiced for many ages in Kazakhstan. We trained them how to perform prayers in an Hanafism methodology. We also published brochures and shared them. We also learned, and they learned together with us. Soon we'll have a fourth anniversary when we had first returnees to Kazakhstan. As Gulnaz mentioned, we passed the most difficult time and challenge. Normally, it's a first contact. We actively applied the algorithm of de-radicalization, and we are quite successful. Cholpon, this is the end of my presentation in brief. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shaumetov. I think it's indeed very impressive. And I think there are many practices which other countries can learn from Kazakhstan. And I'm sure there will be many questions during the discussion part to you. And I saw already several questions in the chat. So I think the discussion part will also going to be very interesting. So let's move to the next country now, Tajikistan. In May 2019, Tajikistan repatriated 84 children from Iraqi prisons. And maybe you know already that very recently on 26th of July of this year, Tajikistan repatriated 104 children and 42 women from Al-Hol and Rosh camps. But Tajikistan has hundreds of voluntarily returnees, including about 300 women already. So today we have with us Dr. Azizi Rustam. He is the Deputy Director of the Center for Islamic Studies under the President of the Republic of Tajikistan. His research has been focused on the history of Islam in the region and the spread of the radical ideologies. Dr. Azizi is a member of the working group under the General Prosecutor's Office of the Republic of Tajikistan to develop and evaluate the national strategies on countering violent extremism. So Mr. Rustam Azizi already have been very active in international platforms, also hearing the experience of Tajikistan. And so, thank you for joining us today, Mr. Azizi. And can you please share Tajikistan's experience about prosecution and rehabilitation of female returnees in Tajikistan? Floor is yours.
So thank you. Thank you, Cholpon, for inviting me to participate.
Your video is off, Rustam. Please.
Yes, it will be better because I will
okay.
have very weak connection. So that's why it will be better to off. So you saw that I'm alive. So I think it will. Yeah. So after your permission, I will switch to Russian. Дорогие друзья,
dear friends, I'll switch now to the Russian. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for organizing such an interesting platform, a dialogue platform, to share experience and views. In particular, I was really interested to know more about Kazakhstan experience. And I'm confident I can apply a lot of methods based on Kazakhstan experience. Now, talking about repatriation and return of women and children. Let me share background so you better understand the specifics of Tajikistan and attitudes of both the society and the government. Unlike many countries, Tajikistan has a unique experience, not pleasant one, but at least we also had the experience of returning our citizens. It took place back in early 90s and early 2000s when we were returning our citizens after the civil war. In 90s and 2000, Tajikistan had returned almost 1 million citizens. Precisely 980,000 citizens we repatriated and returned from Afghanistan and other countries. And because of civil war, we had 153,000 died. And it echoes up to date. Such things as rehabilitation, repatriation. Within these methodologies, we started applying approaches developed at this time and mechanisms. These are the specifics of Tajikistan. For instance, Tajikistan, at the very beginning of this process, when our citizens joined ISIS, starting from 2015, the president had issued an order those who confessed can be eligible for amnesty. And voluntarily returned citizens, the number of those who were voluntarily returned to the country totaled 800 today. And of course, it promotes those who would like to come back. According to official data, I mean the National Security Committee of Tajikistan, 1,898 Tajik citizens joined ISIS. And among them, there were about 800 women and children. And up to today, and the situation is as follows. 575 women and children were in Syria. We recently had one flight. 84 children returned from Iraq. I was looking for the numbers, but hopefully it will be published soon.
Rustam, мы вас не слышим.
There is a pause on the part of Rustam. I think he is disconnected. Rustam, we can't hear you.
He's coming back, yeah. Rustam?
Простите, меня прервалась связь. Меня
I
слышно?
apologize. I have connection problems. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Спасибо. Теперь, говоря о таджикском подходе, естественно,
talking about the Tajik approach, certainly Tajikistan doesn't focus too much on this phenomenon. It's not covered in mass media, and we don't have special name for special operations such in Jusan in Kazakhstan. Given that we don't have any name for this operation, it has a sense of populism, and it's very sensitive in Tajikistan. And it is normal, ordinary work for Tajikistan, and became normal. And of course, government pays more attention. Rehabilitation, repatriation processes are performed mainly by the government or by government entities with a minimum engagement of NGO or INGOs. But they exist and they work. For that, we have established a working group, and we attempted to understand the phenomenon. For that, we identified 4 main factors. We agreed that these issues must be covered by the government, and documents must be classified. First of all, due to security reasons. Overconfidence, when we used to say we returned 1 million citizens, we cannot handle with 1,000. This was another factor. And a similar factor as in Kazakhstan, we didn't want to separate or grant special status for returnees. We wanted to treat them equally along with other citizens. However, there was a government willingness to return all of them. After the first flight from Iraq and success, in terms of self-returnees, we were planning to organize another flight from the northern Syria due to combat and fights in the northern part of Syria and COVID. We delayed that flight. However, we are now planning another flight to Syria. We never reviewed scenarios in our national strategic plan. Talking about scenarios, we never expected we would have a larger number of returnees. For that, we have identified the priorities on combating violent extremism. And in the strategy, we have action plans on reintegration, rehabilitation of women. Rustam, could you please speak slower? In addition, we have indicators on rehabilitation process of returnees from combat zones or victims of radicalist ideologies. We have a program in place. I will not list it out. However, there are 12 items. We have a strategy, we have a program, we have clear indicators and action plans set forth by the government. For that, we have established a working group in charge for rehabilitation. This government working group includes only ministries and agencies, 12 ministries and agencies under the chair of Deputy Prime Minister. Each ministry is in charge for its own scope of work and must provide reports on a quarterly basis. General Prosecutor's Office, as a coordinating agency, must publish some information on its website. The remaining part of the documents or information is classified. Now let me talk more about self-returnees. Some of them
Рустам, извините, пожалуйста, вы очень быстро говорите, и переводчик не успевает, пожалуйста.
Хорошо. Так вот, по женщинам, которые вернулись, самовозвращенцам,
women self-returnees, few words. Only 300 women returned, from which only 9 were sentenced. Only. Most were amnestied or sentenced conditionally. The dynamics is towards decrease. In 2017, we had 3, 2, later 2 in 2011, no single woman was sentenced for terrorism or extremism related crimes. It means, it shows that women have more humanistic approach on the part of the government. About those 40 returned, they're under investigation. The information is classified. However, most probably they will not be sentenced. As for services, they were provided by the government, or they are providing by the government or INGOs. The basic package of services, such as social services, such as medical care, medical rehabilitation. They have to stay 1 month at a special camp at Varzov Valley in one of the regions of Tajikistan. We have medical workers, sociologists, lawyers, linguists. Based on each case, we develop individual plans. Some return to their homes, a residence, a place of residence, or to rehabilitation centers. Some unfortunately is sentenced. Who work with women? First of all, it's a Committee on Women Affairs under the government. There is a special crisis group. Hotline is available. 1312. You can call, or anyone can call to this hotline. We have psychologists, lawyers, social workers who are in contact with law enforcement agencies 24/7. And basic services are provided based on needs-based approach. What else I would like to highlight? As for theological part of rehabilitation, psychological or other care, we have psychologists from the Committee on Women Affairs or the Ministry of Health. Rehabilitation or religious rehabilitation, for that we engage the Committee or the Center of Islamic Studies. Of course, most work is performed in prisons. Unfortunately, there are interruptions by other participants. Could you please turn off your microphones? Please unmute your microphones if you don't speak. The portion of work performed by religious institutions, they develop individual plans similar in neighboring country. Now let me talk about the role of NGOs and INGOs. Donor support or the support is fragmented. Material, financial support is the most of the aid or the assistance. For instance, UNDP prepared a special toolkit for working groups and counseling groups at local levels to build capacity. There are other groups which works with children. Human Rights Center, for instance, works with the religious leaders or theologians. So most of the support is in the form of material or financial support, or in the form of work with representatives who provide such services, meaning the agencies or institutions. This is the end of my presentation. In brief, I'll be glad to answer your questions, if any, during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Azize. I think we will be discussing more Tajikistan's experience as the next flight of returnees will be coming soon. So Tajikistan intends to repatriate all citizens from northern Syria. So I received one request from one participant saying that if she can use this information for the research. So in general, this workshop is not intended for publication. It's just to inform PRR practitioners and diplomats to share the experience. If some of you intend to publish some information from this workshop, please come to us. And if you would like to sit one of the speakers, also please come to us. We need to get permission from the speakers. It's just comments. So in general, Central Asian experience of repatriation and rehabilitation have drawn high attention from the international community. It's indeed would be interesting to have insights from European experts also. So we have today with us international experts and Mr. Robert Orell, and he has 2 decades of experience in the field of disengagement, rehabilitation, and reintegration. He is a member of the steering committee of the European Commission's Radicalization Awareness Network, RAN, and he has been a co-leader of the Rehabilitation Working Group since 2011. So Mr. Orell was the director of Exit Sweden for 10 years, and he was also the program director at Exit USA for 3 years. So he has vast of experience in rehabilitation and reintegration, and also he visited Kazakhstan to learn the experience and to meet returnees. So Mr. Robert Orell, so we would like to hear from you. and thank you for accepting our invitation. Could you tell us about your observations about rehabilitation of female returnees in Europe and Kazakhstan also? Maybe you have concrete examples, good practices, promising practices. So floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you, Chapelon, for the invitation and the Bulan Center for this initiative. It's my pleasure to be here to share some of the experiences and learning from the European perspective. What really comes across crucial is that there seems to be the importance of cultural sensitivity, so to understanding the target group and to understand where do they come from. I will come back to this in my presentation, but I wanted to share first just very briefly on the EU network RAN, Radicalization Awareness Network, just 2 sentences so you have a context of the work that's being done. This is a practitioner network set up by the European Commission 11 years ago with the aim to gather first-line practitioners to share experiences and to spread within the EU promising or best practices. The work is divided up in 9 different thematic working groups: communication and narrative, the local working group, prison working group, police and law enforcement working group, mental health, and a few others. The working group I've been involved in is primarily the RAN Rehabilitation working group, where we look at rehabilitation practices from European perspective. How do we work with exit and rehabilitation processes? What are the different type of practices? What are the different type of experiences that we see here? And one of the things that we've been advocating and identifying as an important part for a long time is really the gender sensitivity aspect. So how do we work with clients from a gender perspective? And as been addressed earlier, most of the practices are developed for male clients or beneficiaries. But recently, the last few years, there's been more and more attention on also developing practices and specific interventions for females and to identify how they would look. We had a meeting on this theme 2019, and there's a paper that I'd be happy to share the link to later on in the chat. It's an English paper with some insights from that work. So just shortly to wrap up, Ron, it's really to gather practitioners and to share promising practices and experiences. So what I prepared to share here today is really thinking of a gender sensitive approach when working with female clients is, as I said earlier, crucial when we understand the gender aspects of being involved in violent extremism and leaving violent extremism. My work has primarily been with individuals leaving violent neo-Nazi groups. The experience I have of other target groups is primarily the work in Kazakhstan that I've done over the last 1.5 years with the mentorship program for released terrorist offenders. But what we see is a lot of similarities in terms of the reestablishing of your social identity, leaving a very closed group and mindset, and shifting into developing something new. So what would your new identity be? How would you develop that? Together with whom? And how do we do this? Some of the important aspects that we see is that it can be important to have female mentors for female clients, as experiences from female beneficiaries can be very varied, but a lot of them really express that they experienced discrimination within the organization or different type of traumatic events, severe violence, physical abuse, sexual abuse, mental abuse, and the importance of talking about this from a gendered perspective. So the importance of having female mentors to engage in this work. When we look at the European side, there's according to statistics from 2020, there's approximately 2,000 women and children who are related to violent extremism, who are linked in the particular area of Daesh. And all EU member states have had discussions on how to work with this. What are the approaches? How should we engage with repatriation of individuals? So until this day, there's no large scale operation like what we saw with the Operation Juzan or the experience from Tajikistan, that you bring back a large amount of people, but more sparse experiences of individuals counted in tens of individuals, so 10, 20, 40, but not hundreds that we heard of in the previous two presentations. According to a report from Save the Children 2021, 25 of the European countries have repatriated citizens. Promising cases or examples could be found in Belgium, in Germany, France, the Netherlands, Finland, Sweden, and other. But once again, not on the same type of organized level that we heard of from the Central Asian countries and member states. This might also be because of the EU's different legal frameworks, the different federal, regional, and local structures that are in place. There's no homogeneous framework for this type of work for European member states. But some of the challenges that's identified when we look at repatriation and engaging in this is, first of all, to understand the lived through experiences and the lived through experiences of the females and their relatives, the children, for example. What have they gone through? How can we relate to and understand this? And who are best placed to cope with and understand this type of experiences? And then to develop responses accordingly to the needs of the returning women and children. The second challenge is to engage the relevant and needed stakeholders. Most practitioners, most agency don't naturally feel that this is their field of work or that they belong in this type of field. But practice really shows that it's important to have a wide range of stakeholders and actors involved. So a multi-agency, multi-competent working team. So engage all the relevant stakeholders. The third challenge is then to address the needs of the returning women and their potential children or families. So once again, what are the experiences when they were in the group, in Daesh? What were the experiences in the camps? We all heard about the lack of humanitarian standards and the challenges of being in these camps. How do we understand those experiences? The experience of receiving the member states and community support. So to the challenge to really take this in and to adapt the interventions to this. Emotional, cognitive, relational aspects of this. Also to look at what does it mean to, what does motherhood mean when you have adapted to the life in Syria and Iraq under Daesh? What type of parental strategies or skills have been developed? How do we work with this? How do we support and strengthen new more pro-social, positive ways of parenthood or motherhood? And here the importance of trauma comes in. So to acknowledge trauma and to treat, to create awareness, identify and respond in a relevant manner to this. Here, I think the psychoeducational approaches that we heard from Gulnaz, for example, are critical. How do we educate about understanding trauma? To simply help to give words on, this is what I've gone through, this is what this means. And then next challenge is then to equip the needed practitioners and relevant stakeholders. What do they know and what do they need, and how should they respond? How should they cooperate? And then to make all of this in practice, which is perhaps the main challenge. How do we get this operationalized? I think once again, the experience of Gulnaz is really wonderful, how she managed the network, and we heard the other practices as well, how to do this in practices. So when we look at reintegration, functional and social reintegration, there are a few different perspectives. We can divide the rehabilitation reintegration into the functional aspect that focus on the practical aspects. So returning women and their families and children, they really need support with a lot of practical things. Housing, employment, education, childcare, child fostering skills, health and social services. So how do we facilitate this functional aspect of the rehabilitation reintegration? And then the second perspective is the social aspects of reintegration, social rehabilitation reintegration, which really focuses more on the deeper aspects of identity. Who am I now that I returned from this particular war zone or environment? Where do I belong? How is my relations with other people? How do I manage relations with other people? How do I manage internal processes of emotions and cognitive thoughts and etc.? And here it's important to offer reflections. Once again, I refer to the work that Gulnaz shared earlier, to have perhaps peer group, to have a group therapy, to have shared experiences with others with similar background, to understand how they went through, what was the success and experiences from those individuals, and what can I learn and take in from that. And then also working through the intentions and expectations. What did I want to achieve when I joined, and how did this affect my life now? So with this, there's really a lot more to explore and develop, also on the European side, both in terms of policy, so policy recommendations. There are very few countries who have policies on repatriation or once again, in the same way, mass repatriation of individuals, but then also the practices. Who are responsible? What are the frameworks, both the legal and the cooperative frameworks for this type of work? And I wanted to share just a few lines on the experiences of working with females in the Kazakhstan mentorship program that I worked with. Akniyet was one of the partners in this project with Alim. The USAID sponsored this, and it was done through the DAI, Central Asian Support for Stable Societies, the CAS project. We had a 1.5-year mentorship program. There will be a mentorship handbook printed any week, any month now, that summarizes this work specifically for Central Asian stakeholders who are interested in mentorship program for released terrorist offenders. And here we saw the importance of having a flexible approach, learning a bit by doing. So we had an idea and we had a bit of a framework, but once we are operationalized, we have to be flexible to see what are the challenges and what are the needs that comes up for this specific target group in this specific regions or country. How do we adapt to it? We saw the importance of addressing what I mentioned earlier, the functional reintegration. So equipping people with opportunities for work, education. A strong focus was on entrepreneurship. How do we strengthen individuals to engage in entrepreneurship, and to solve the functional aspects of the rehabilitation reintegration, to then be able to focus on the social reintegration. One of the other aspects was the importance of time. Alim mentioned this earlier, that it can take a long time to build trust and relation with clients or beneficiaries. And this is true, particularly with this target group that doesn't really trust people outside of their inside communities or environment. So we have to invest time, 6 months, a year, perhaps 2 years. It's usually common to the common time frame just to establish a trustful working relation, a working alliance. And this was one of the lessons we also saw in this pilot program, that when we establish this type of program, we need time. We need to have sufficient time to be able to create this trust. And in the program, we also had a small track of related to females to address this. And here we saw, once again, the importance of having a female mentor to respond and address to the needs of the female mentee. So the importance of having this aspect in the program. There are a few publications that I'd be happy to share or recommend in English. I will try to post links in the chat during the discussions. And I would like to just conclude with an example from one of my clients or beneficiaries that I worked with in Sweden. She left a neo-Nazi group, so it was a different context, a different group. But I think what she summarized when she summarized her own process is fully relevant also in this context. So this was a young woman who was part of a group who planned to commit terrorist attacks. They got arrested early on in the process, in the first stage, which was during vandalism of public property. And when she came in touch with Exit, the program I was working with at that time, she shared, after 2 or 3 years when we worked together, she formulated what she went through, I think very concise. She said that when I went into the movement, to the involvement in this group, I received a package of who I was, what my views were, the ideology, the style of my clothes, the group that I should hang out with, my social friends and circles, the music that I should listen to. Everything was served in a package, and I didn't really have to think or make decisions of myself. And then when I left, I had to rework all of these choices and decisions, and I had to rediscover who was I. I had to rebuild my identity and identify for myself what were my values and views, what were my style of clothes or appearance, who were my friends, what type of music did I like to listen to, what were my political views, what type of interest did I have. So I think this really nicely categorizes that you have to rework a lot of different perspectives when leaving this type of involvement. And for this reason, it's important that we provide support, that there is organized, structured support from a range of different partners and actors who work together to support this type of process. With this, I would like to conclude and leave it back for discussions and questions. So, Chaplon, I leave it back to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, all right. So thank you very much, Mr. Orel. So this concludes our workshop on good practices in rehabilitation and reintegration of female returnees. And I would like to thank our speakers, Gulnaz Razdykova, Alim Shaumetov, Robert Orel, and Rustam Azizi. And also I thank participants who asked questions. And thank you for your contributions to the discussion. And it was, I think, very rich discussion. And hopefully we will continue our webinars in the future. And if you have any questions regarding the webinar or future events, please contact us. And we look forward to hosting more events in the future. Thank you. Bye.